They tied my wrists so tight I couldn't feel my fingers, but I didn't make a sound. I wouldn't give Judge Blackwood the satisfaction. The crowd had gathered like vultures, maybe 50 of them. Some I'd known all my life. Others just came to watch a girl get whipped like it was some kind of sport. They lined the edge of Millbrook's Main Street, faces slack with fear, pity, or worse, approval. I saw old Mr. Langley from the general store, shifting nervously, hat in hand. I saw Mrs. Pearl clutching her Bible like it might shield her from the truth of what was about to happen. And I saw my little sister, Annie, peeking from behind the stable wall. Her eyes swollen from crying, her body still too weak to stand long. I almost called out to her, told her to go back inside. But I didn't. I wanted her to see I wasn't afraid, even if I was. Judge Harrison Blackwood stood on the makeshift platform they used for town meetings and gallows. His black coat clung to his stiff frame and his voice dripped with theatrical outrage. Sarah McKinley, you stand guilty of theft, a crime that threatens the moral order of our community. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, she only took $40. $47.30, Blackwood corrected sharply, glaring down from the platform. From the town treasury, meant for road repairs, taken by her own hand and spent God knows where. I spent it on medicine, I said loud and clear. Annie was dying. You'd let her rot for the sake of gravel and dirt. The judge's face tightened. He didn't like being interrupted, or contradicted, or reminded that he was more stone than man. The court has spoken. 20 lashes, publicly administered, effective immediately. Someone gasped. I think it was Mrs. Pearl. The deputies dragged me toward the whipping post. My boots scraped the dirt. My knees trembled, but I made myself walk. I wouldn't give 'em the pleasure of carrying me like some broken doll. I was not broken. Not yet. They tied me to the post, arms stretched high. The sun burned my back, sweat trickled into my eyes. The air hung thick and silent. No one dared stop it. No one dared speak. Blackwood stepped forward. You may yet show remorse, Miss McKinley, he said almost kindly. Do that, and I might reduce the sentence. I spit at his feet. You want remorse? Try finding it in your own heart first. He nodded to the deputy with the whip. I closed my eyes. I wasn't ready for the pain, not really. Who could be? But I braced myself with one thought. I'd do it all again if it meant saving Annie. The leather snapped through the air. Someone screamed. It wasn't me. It was the sound of a town pretending not to see the truth that this wasn't justice. It was a warning, a lesson. Step out of line and this could be you. But I'd rather be beaten than bow. And I hoped somewhere in the crowd someone else was thinking the same thing.
The leather cracked again, but the blow never landed. There was a blur of motion, a man stepping through the dust like he'd been carved out of it. He moved fast and without hesitation, placing himself between me and the whip. The lash meant for my back tore across his shoulder with a sound like tearing canvas. The crowd gasped. Blackwood's mouth hung open. The deputy froze, the whip falling limp in his hand. And the man, he didn't flinch. He straightened slowly, turned to face the judge, and said in a voice like gravel soaked in whiskey, You lay another hand on her, and I'll see you tried for assault on a federal officer. The air shifted. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them. He was tall, lean, but broad-shouldered, with a worn hat pulled low and a dust-covered duster that had seen 100 trails. His jaw was square, his eyes clear, and in his holster rested a Colt that looked like it knew how to speak for him. I don't give a damn who you think you are, Blackwood snapped, face redder than a boiled beet. This is a court-ordered sentence, and you are obstructing justice. The man turned slightly toward me. His voice softened. You all right? I was too stunned to answer. He looked back at the judge. Name's Jake Morrison, and if this is your idea of justice, I suggest you get your house in order, because I'm not moving. You've no authority here, Blackwood hissed. Jake smiled, just barely. You want to test that theory? I've got paperwork, but maybe you'd rather talk about it after your deputy here gets treated for a dislocated wrist. He glanced down at the man with the whip, who was still gripping his shoulder from where Jake had blocked the blow. The crowd didn't know what to do. People weren't used to anyone standing up to Judge Blackwood, not like this. I stared at the stranger's back, disbelief mixing with a strange, stubborn kind of hope. I didn't know this man, but he'd taken a blow for me. A stranger had taken my punishment, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Untie her, Jake ordered. No one moved. I said untie her. It was Deputy Tom Cray, a kid really, younger than me, whose hands were shaking as he walked toward the post. He looked at the judge like a beaten dog waiting for a kick. Blackwood didn't speak. Tom hesitated, then reached up and began unfastening the leather straps around my wrists. My arms dropped. I staggered, dizzy, but Jake caught me before I hit the ground. I've got you, he said, just loud enough for me to hear. People were murmuring now. Some were nodding. Some were backing away, like they'd just realized the rules had changed, but hadn't figured out how. Blackwood tried to speak, but the words got caught in his throat. Authority was his currency. Without fear, he was bankrupt. Jake turned to the crowd. This woman stole $47 to save her sister's life, and your judge thought that deserved blood. I looked around, saw the faces, some ashamed, some angry, some just tired. Now I'm here to ask, what kind of town are you really? Nobody answered. Not yet. But the silence was different now. It wasn't fear. It was awakening.
Jake helped me to a bench just outside the sheriff's office, keeping his hand lightly on my arm in case I fell again. My legs were still shaky, and my head buzzed with pain and disbelief. Someone had stopped the judge. Someone I didn't even know. The town stood frozen, waiting for what would happen next. "Tell him," Jake said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell him why you took the money." I looked at the crowd. I saw familiar faces, the teacher, the grocer, the undertaker. I saw Annie still crouched behind the stable, too afraid to move. I didn't want to tell the story again, but I made myself do it. "My sister was sick," I said, standing as best I could. "She's 16. She had fever bad enough to boil the life right out of her. I begged the judge for help. He said no, said the town's funds weren't meant for charity." I scanned the crowd. Eyes met mine, then quickly looked away. "So I took it, $47.30, bought quinine, broth, clean linens, brought her back from death's door." I paused. "If that's a crime worth 20 lashes, then this town is already dead." There was a long silence. Then a voice from the crowd. "I remember when Blackwood fined my husband $100 for fixing our fence without a permit." Another voice. "He raised taxes to buy that damn gold-framed chair for his office." Someone else. "He locked up my boy for spitting near the courthouse, called it public defilement." The whispers became murmurs. Murmurs grew into voices. Jake nodded slowly. "Sounds like a pattern," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I offered to pay the debt. He refused, because this ain't about justice. It's about power." Blackwood, still standing on the platform, finally exploded. "This is insurrection! That woman is a thief, and you're all fools for defending her." Jake turned to him, calm and deadly. "No, Judge. We're just tired of being afraid." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. "Governor's seal, my badge number. I've been traveling through towns just like this one, towns where judges have forgotten what justice means." He looked back at me. "You're not the first I've seen whipped for doing the right thing, but you might be the last if folks here got the courage to make it so." A hush fell over the street. Blackwood was trembling, but not from cold. It was rage, the rage of a man losing control. "You think a piece of paper lets you walk into my court and take over my town?" Jake smiled. "No, but the truth does." He turned again to the people. "You've been quiet too long. This ends today or not at all." A woman stepped forward, Miss Clara, who ran the boarding house. Her voice was firm. "Sarah's no criminal." Then the blacksmith. "I'll stand with her." Then Tom Cray, the young deputy. He walked up beside Jake, took off his badge, and stared straight at the judge. "I won't follow your orders anymore, not if they go against what's right." Blackwood took a step back. Jake's words were working, not just because of what he said, because the town had finally started listening to itself, and maybe, just maybe, believing in its own voice again.
Blackwood's lip curled, but even he could see the tide had turned. He scanned the faces in the crowd, townsfolk who once trembled at his words, now staring back with something different in their eyes. Conviction. Defiance. He barked, "Deputies, arrest this man!" But no one moved. Tom Cray, still holding his badge in one hand, said quietly, "No, sir." Blackwood blinked. "What did you say to me?" Tom took a breath, stepped forward. "I said no. Not this time. You swore an oath. I swore to uphold the law, not help you twist it." Jake unfolded the paper again and held it higher so all could see. "I'm a territorial marshal, appointed by Governor Tillman. Been sent through this stretch of counties to root out corruption in the judiciary. We've got 6 towns already under review. Millbrook just became number 7. He turned slowly, addressing everyone now. "Your judge has been under suspicion for a year, pocketing fines, using forced labor, selling seized property for personal gain. I've got affidavits, witnesses. What I didn't have was a moment like this, a town willing to stand." Blackwood stumbled back a step. "Lies! Then you won't mind an audit, or a trial, or a jury that ain't got your boot on its throat." Jake reached into his coat and pulled out another document. This one signed by the territorial attorney. "Effective today, Judge Harrison Blackwood is suspended pending investigation. I'm placing him under arrest for abuse of authority, unlawful punishment, and embezzlement." The judge's face went gray. "You can't." Jake drew his revolver, not to threaten, but to end all argument. He held it low, calm, a tool of the law, not fear. "I can, and I am." Tom stepped forward with a pair of iron cuffs. He looked at Blackwood the way a man might look at a dying fire, not with pity, but with resolve. "You're done here." Blackwood stared at him, at me, at Jake, at the crowd who once feared him, now watching like they'd waited years for this reckoning.
Then, without another word, he turned his hands out. Tom snapped the cuffs around his wrists. A sound rippled through the street. Not cheers, not yet. Just a long, low breath, like the whole town had been holding it. Jake nodded to Tom. "Get him inside. Don't rough him up. We'll do this proper." As they led Blackwood toward the jailhouse, people slowly began to move. Miss Clara put an arm around my shoulder. The blacksmith offered Jake a firm nod. Even Mr. Langley, who never dared speak against the judge, mumbled something about finding those old ledgers. Jake looked at me. "You all right?" I was still trying to process it. Everything had turned in minutes. I'd gone from a criminal to a witness, a victim to a spark. "I don't even know your story," I said. "You'll hear it. But right now, we've got a new one starting here." He stepped onto the platform, the very place where I'd been condemned. "I don't want your praise. I want your help. Because this town ain't fixed just because one man's in cuffs. We've all got work to do." For the first time in months, I felt something real crack open inside me. Hope. It was small, but it was alive.
For about 2 hours, Millbrook held its breath like a town reborn. Blackwood sat behind bars for the first time in his life, and folks began emerging from their homes like it was spring after a long, cruel winter. But hope never lasts long without a fight. The first sign of trouble was the dust cloud on the horizon. 4 riders at full gallop, coats flapping like crows in a storm. Jake saw them before I did, standing still in the middle of Main Street with his hand resting casually near his revolver. I watched from the boarding house porch, Annie beside me now, finally strong enough to sit upright. She looked from Jake to the approaching riders with wide, nervous eyes. "Who are they?" she whispered. "Trouble," I said. "The kind that doesn't knock." They came hard and fast, reining in just feet from where Jake stood. The lead man dismounted first, tall, silver hair, mustache waxed and pointed like a bayonet. His name was Marcus Donnelly. I knew it before he even spoke. Everyone in Millbrook did. He wasn't law, but he carried more weight than any badge ever could. Foreman of the Pike Hollow Mining Company, and the real reason Blackwood had lasted as long as he did. "Well, well," Donnelly said, brushing dust off his jacket. "Heard there was a mutiny in Millbrook." Blackwood didn't flinch. "We call it justice." Donnelly grinned. "Funny. Folks usually wait till after breakfast before spouting nonsense." He stepped closer, and behind him his riders, thugs and company letter, let their hands drift to their belts. "I want Blackwood released, now." Jake smiled, just a little. "And I want a steak dinner and 10 good years back. We don't always get what we want." Donnelly's face twitched. "You interfering federal types always think your paper and badges can protect you, but out here, we protect our own." Jake stepped forward, just a half step, calm as ever. "You mean you protect your profits. Blackwood let you mine outside your legal zone, didn't he? Sold you condemned land on behalf of the county. Fined miners who tried to unionize." Donnelly's grin vanished. "We've got statements, records, testimony, and by now the telegram I sent this morning has reached the governor's office. You're not just tied to Blackwood, you're next." The townsfolk were gathering again, whispers rising like dry grass catching flame. Donnelly's hand twitched toward his holster. Jake's didn't. "You really want to start shooting in front of witnesses?" Jake asked, voice deadly soft. "I won't miss, but you won't see it coming either." For a long moment, nobody moved. It was like the whole town held its breath again, only this time it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. Then Clara, standing just outside the saloon, said, "He's right." Others nodded. The blacksmith stepped forward, hammer in hand. "You want to fight, Donnelly? You'll get one, but you won't win it."
For the first time, Donnelly looked unsure. Jake added, "You don't own this town, not anymore." Donnelly spat. "You think this ends here? You think letters and speeches matter? You don't know how deep this goes." Jake leaned in, voice sharp enough to cut steel. "I do, and we're ready to dig." Donnelly scowled, then mounted his horse. "You made a mistake, Marshal, all of you." "Maybe, but it was ours to make." The riders turned and galloped off, their dust trailing behind them like a bad dream. Jake exhaled and turned to face us. "No more hiding. This is just the beginning." And somehow, we all knew it.
Donnelly didn't bluff for long. The next morning, the town woke to the sound of hooves. Not 4 this time, 40. Men in mining company colors lined the street like a private army, some on horseback, some on foot, all armed. I stood behind the curtain at the boarding house, heart in my throat. Annie gripped my hand so tight her fingers turned white. Jake was already outside. His coat was off, sleeves rolled, hat low, calm, centered, like he'd seen this coming and didn't flinch from it. Donnelly rode up the center of town, boots polished, rifle in hand. "I gave you a chance. Now I take what's mine." Jake didn't move. "You never owned this town, just bullied it quiet." He pointed to the courthouse. "Blackwood's still under arrest, so unless you came to file paperwork, you're trespassing, armed, which makes you an invading force." Donnelly raised his rifle an inch. "You gonna stop me with words?" Jake's hand hovered by his hip. "No." The silence cracked like a bone. Donnelly went for his gun, but Jake was faster. The shot rang out, echoing down the canyon of buildings like a cannon blast. Donnelly's rifle flew from his hand as he crumpled off his horse, blood blossoming across his chest. Panic exploded. Miners screamed, drew weapons. But Jake wasn't alone. Deputy Tom fired from the roof of the livery. Clara popped off shots from the boarding house stairs. Even the blacksmith joined in, wielding a shotgun like he was born with it. The townsfolk had chosen their side. Gunfire lit up the street, windows shattered, dust and smoke filled the air. I dragged Annie down under the counter as a bullet punched through the boarding house wall. My heart pounded so loud I could hardly hear, but I didn't feel helpless this time. Out the window, I saw Jake dive behind the water trough, then roll and fire, picking off a man trying to flank the jailhouse. Within minutes, it was over. The enforcers lay scattered or surrendered. Some ran, some bled in the street, but none were left standing proud. Jake stood slowly, revolver still smoking, coat torn at the shoulder. He scanned the damage, the broken windows, the wounded townsfolk, the dead enforcers, and shouted, "Anyone still breathing gets medical help. No exceptions, even the bastards who came to kill us." Tom called out, "We got 3 down, 1 bad. Get the doc and tell him no more separate treatment. All folks equal now." People moved with purpose, not fear. For the first time, this town worked like a town again. Someone yelled, "What do we do with the prisoners?" Jake holstered his weapon. "We process 'em, proper, legal. No lynching, no vengeance, just justice." He turned to the crowd, dust settling behind him like smoke after a storm. "You all fought today, but it wasn't just bullets. You fought for the soul of this place." I stepped into the street, Annie beside me. I looked around, bruised faces, bandaged arms, blood on boots and brick. But I also saw something else. We'd stood up, and we were still standing. Jake walked over, voice softer now.
"You all right?" I nodded, tears in my eyes. "You saved this town." He looked at the wounded, the smoke, the broken glass. "No, we all did."
3 days after the gunfight, Millbrook was no longer a quiet town. It was the talk of the entire territory. Telegraphs buzzed up and down the wire. Reporters rode in from 2 counties over. A photographer even showed up, asking Jake to pose with his badge. He refused. "This ain't a celebration," he said. "It's a reckoning." But even so, something had shifted. People didn't just walk with their heads high, they walked with purpose. The jailhouse held 3 surviving enforcers and 1 corrupt deputy from another town who'd tried to sneak out in the confusion. Blackwood remained locked up, quiet now, like a snake that had lost its fangs. Federal agents arrived on the 5th day, wearing crisp coats and carrying thick ledgers. Jake handed over everything: the stolen funds ledger, the court transcripts, witness statements. Miss Clara even produced a hidden journal from her late husband, a former clerk who documented every crooked deal he wasn't brave enough to stop in life. They spent hours interviewing folks. I testified too, not just about my arrest, but about everything I'd seen and suspected in the past year. I was surprised how many others stepped up with stories of their own. Jake met with the agents in the saloon, where they set up temporary headquarters. When he came out that evening, he looked tired, not broken, just worn. He saw me on the porch, sat beside me without a word. "They offered me a new job," he said after a while. "Bigger post, Denver, full authority over judicial reform for the entire Southern Territory." I didn't say anything right away. I stared out at the street. Kids were playing near the blacksmith's forge. Someone was fixing the courthouse windows. He glanced at me. "It's a big offer." "It is." "But?" I asked. He gave a small smile. "But there's something about this town, the people, the fight we won. I don't want to leave that behind." I looked at him, heart thudding. He kept talking, like the words had been weighing on him. "They also offered me something else, a different role, regional coordinator, based right here. I'd oversee reform efforts, help other towns do what Millbrook just did. Same mission, but I'd be here, with you." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" He looked at me like I was the only person that mattered. "Because," he said, "I've seen a lot of towns, Sarah, a lot of people, but I've never seen someone stand up the way you did. Not for money, not for glory, just because it was right." I felt my face flush, but I held his gaze. "You're not the only one staying," I said. "The people here, they're different now. They're awake." And they were. The town had formed a citizens' council. Even Tom Cray had taken on a new role, helping build a civilian-run oversight committee for law enforcement. The preacher announced a day of remembrance for those lost in the skirmish. The blacksmith offered free repairs to any home damaged by gunfire. For the first time in years, the people weren't afraid of their own town. They owned it. Jake stood, stretched, then turned to me. "We've got work ahead, but I think we're ready." And I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about building something better.
6 months later, Millbrook didn't just look different, it felt different. Gone were the hushed silences when authority passed by. Gone were the locked doors and lured eyes. The courthouse now stood with its windows open, its bench filled by an elected magistrate and a jury of local citizens. The jail was cleaned, repaired, and used the way it was meant to, not as a tool for fear, but a place for real justice. Blackwood and the remaining enforcers had been tried in a federal court. Jake got the news on a chilly September morning. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, abuse of power, conspiracy. They'd be spending the rest of their lives behind bars in a place they couldn't buy their way out of. Jake read the telegram aloud on the porch of the town hall. A crowd gathered to hear it. When he finished, there were no cheers, just quiet nods. Justice didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like closure. Later that evening, I found him behind the stable, brushing down one of the sheriff's horses. He looked up when I approached, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. Uncertainty. He sent the offer again. He said quietly, "Promotion. Denver. Full authority. Big team. Bigger reach." I nodded. "You thinking about it?" "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't, but—" He stopped, turned to face me fully. "I came here chasing a mission, looking for places where the law had gone wrong. What I didn't expect was to find someone like you." My throat tightened. "I've seen men shot, towns burned, justice twisted into a weapon. And I've seen you standing at that post, not flinching, not backing down even when the whole town had their backs turned." He stepped closer, his voice lower now. "This town doesn't need a hero, it needs a foundation. And I'd rather build that here, with you, than chase titles somewhere else." I didn't speak for a long time. I just looked at him, the way he'd stood for me, for Annie, for everyone. "You're not chasing justice anymore. You're shaping it." Jake smiled, soft and worn. "Then I suppose I'd better stay and see it through." And he did. He took the regional role, but kept his office in Millbrook, used it as a base to travel, to testify, to help other towns rise from under the same shadows we'd once lived in. But he always came home, to our home. Annie recovered. She started helping Miss Clara at the boarding house, then began teaching part-time at the school. People started calling her the second McKinley to fix this town. She'd roll her eyes, but I could tell it meant something. As for me, I opened a little store on Main Street. Nothing grand, just goods, supplies, a place to talk. Folks came by not just to buy things, but to tell their stories, to ask questions, to figure out what kind of town we were still becoming. Jake and I never had a wedding with ribbons or a preacher, but one morning he handed me a simple gold band and said, "No law's ever meant more than this." I wore it every day. Millbrook wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was ours. And out there on the edge of the territory, where the dust still rose and old ghosts still whispered, we planted something strong. Not just justice, legacy.